the birth rate is at a historic low. So the economy affects birth rate and birth rate affects the economy. And oftentimes this relationship drives others to pursue certain policies.
Girl, it's a lot.
Is AI the solution to this decreased birth rate? What is the corporate incentive in the birth rate?
For a lot of these countries with lower birth rates, what they're looking at is migration and immigration to help make up some of that.
Oh, that part! Birth rate economy, a term many have never heard before, but one that we should all pay very close attention to. Is it religion, control, or is there in fact financial incentives to reproductive policies? Today, we take a deep dive into the correlation between the birth rate and economic policies. We unveiled the many aspects in which the birth rate influences the economy and why you may start to see the emergence of certain reproductive policies. This is definitely an episode you should not miss. We thank you guys for joining us and for staying our support. And as always, we say, don't forget to hit subscribe. So some people may wonder, is the push behind forcing women to have babies an economic decision? Is the economy a drive behind, or partially at least, a drive behind some of these policies, potential policies, and decision making? Well, the truth is that the economy and the birth rate are one and one, and they do affect each other. So today we're going to talk about the birth rate economy. Yes, the birth rate economy. Many have not heard that term before, but it's a term that you should be very familiar with. Once again, we are always excited to have Dr. T, the other Dr. T, back on the couch. So you got TNT today. Hey, Dr. Trisa, how are you?
Doing well, doing well.
It is so good to have you back on the couch.
Good to be here for this exciting topic.
Yes, it is. It is. And we especially wanted to have your voice as a mom, as someone who's always conscious about the economy and about the future of children in this world. It's an interesting topic. So most people don't really think about the birth rate economy, right? They kind of think of fertility as being this isolated topic and not really thinking about all the factors of fertility, where the recent statistics by the CDC does show that our birth rate in the United States, and this is not an isolated topic to the United States, but in the United States specifically, the birth rate is at a historic low. So why is this alarming to people? Well, some people may think, well, if we don't have enough workers, then that affects the economy. Is this a valid concern? What do you
think? It is a valid concern. So looking into some of the, not necessarily the policies, but some of the research that's being done and some of the discussion that's being had around birth rate and what its effects may be. And it's going to have different effects on different groups, and especially like different states here in the United States, depending on what they depend on. So if you have a state that is heavily reliant on sales tax and property taxes and all these other things, then yes, if you have less people in the economy, you're going to have less people to tax to be able to make the revenue.
That's a good point.
If you have less people in the economy in the working class, you have less taxes that you can use for retirement funds and for Social Security and all these other things. And so now the burden of this older population doesn't have as much of a spread in the younger population.
Yeah.
So it's looking at it more on that long-term effect, where it's like, it's not something you'll see tomorrow, but it's something that may be evident in 10 to 20 years. So this is something that can affect my 8-year-old when he becomes an adult and has to now go out there and work and pay taxes. So the question becomes, are they going to be looking to tax him more to be able to take care of my generation and the generations ahead of me? Or what is it that we're going to try to do to make up for some of that taxable income that won't be there anymore because we don't have as many people? Now, one of the other things that I read, and I found it very interesting, is that you have to figure out if you're looking at it short term or long term. In the short term, if the birth rate is less, yes, the states do spend less money on things like early childhood education, on things like funding for like the health programs and things like that. So in the short term, it can feel like, yes, you have a little bit of savings because you don't have to spend as much money, you don't have as much money to put in. But what's going to happen in the long term? You have to do that kind of budgeting balance where it's like, yes, we got to make it to the end of the month, but our long-term goal is to be sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
So it is not surprising to hear that there is a forcing of people to have babies in some of the policies that we're here now. You know, you can't bite the hand that feeds you. Like you can't bite it. You can't just focus on, okay, this is what's needed right now. You have to be able to balance that, or else you're not going to be sustainable as an economy. You're not going to
Right.
be sustainable as a state. You may have to rely on more government assistance or whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes, or federal assistance, I should say. So it becomes one of those things where it's like, yeah, you want to figure out if you can get more savings in the system. And if we're not having as many kids, that may be a good thing. But in terms of the long term, it's not necessarily going to be as effective. It's not going to necessarily be as beneficial for the country as a whole. So it kind of makes sense where policies may be coming up now where it's like, yes, we are encouraging more and more children to be born. Um, One
Yeah.
of the things, and this is totally on the side of
Mm-hmm.
the research, this is just me talking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that I find interesting is that um, with the talk of, pushing back on IVF and things like that,
Okay, I was about to go there. I'm glad you touching on that because okay.
what I find interesting about that is
Mm-hmm.
you're going to push back on things like IVF, which is a way to get more births.
Yes. Right? Because it's the reason why to kind of co-sign what you're saying, the reason why it especially doesn't make sense is because one of the factors that is leading to this decreased birth rate is the fact that women are deferring or delaying
Yeah.
childbearing, not just women, I should say people,
People.
because men are doing the same thing, delaying childbearing for an older age so that they can pursue education, so that they can pursue their careers. And so when you are at an advanced age or a more advanced age, you're more likely to encounter some challenges and difficulties in getting pregnant. And we know that the population at large is not getting healthier. The older population is, but the younger population are not healthier. And so there is a multitude of factors that's really playing into it. So for some people, and including, categories that we don't often think about, like our vets who have been
Mm,
injured in combat, who rely on IVF and fertility treatments to be able to have a family. So I agree with you. It doesn't make sense that that would be targeted. But then I will say the way it's being targeted does make sense, right? It's not just IVF being targeted, is that there is a attempt to force the birth or the implantation of all the embryos. So there it's still
Okay.
targeted towards in a very unusual way, trying to maximize the pregnancy of women by forcing people to utilize all of their embryos and to not
Mm,
discard or use any embryos for research, which is oftentimes a option for people, when you're considering storing or
right.
preserving your embryos or your eggs.
Eggs. Right.
And so there is still this underlying theme of trying to maximize the pregnancy of women. And what's an actual slap in the face is the fact that while there's an increased effort to increase the birth rate, there is not the same effort to improve maternal health in the United States. And so while we have not addressed the elephant in the room, we're going towards other efforts that doesn't make sense, and that is undermining some of the efforts towards improving maternal health, because as we know, significant amount of parity does have its own complications as well, and perhaps women will be more likely to have children if they felt safe having children.
That is a very good point at this point in time. Um,
Yeah.
in most of the things that, in most of the studies and whatever I've looked at, there's not been much talk about that maternal mortality, but it does talk about just, um, who is having more of these children and
Mm,
how it correlates to educational level and what it's been historically and compared to what it is now, and just the changes with some of that. Um, and like you pointed out, yes, people are choosing to have children later in life,
mm-hmm,
which can cause some issues for some.
mm-hmm,
It also shortens, I guess, their overall fertility period,
mm-hmm.
right? The time frame with which they would be able to have children and safely have children and not have to worry too much about the other things, it becomes a bit of a shorter time frame. But even for people who are choosing to have children at a younger age, whether it was planned or it happened and they went through with the pregnancy, married or not,
Mm-hmm.
many are not choosing to have more than one or two. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
traditionally we would have had a whole lot more children. And yes,
Yes.
in the United States, but we're also talking worldwide. So this is not just something that's affecting the United States. We know that it's affecting the world.
Yes.
People are not choosing to have as many children because it's not as affordable to have as many children.
Mm-hmm.
And you're having to have more women in the workforce to be able to maintain a household.
Yeah.
So then you have to now find care for the child.
Yes. And
So if it's one child, that might be doable. You start to get an increase in that number, and it's like, where are you going to find the money to take care of this child and still be able to live?
yeah. And I saw a friend of mine sent a post or a social media post the other day, just really looking at how much even daycare costs, and that the cost of daycare is literally no different than the cost of a college tuition. And
Mm,
that's someone's entire salary. Matter of fact, sometimes even more than
right,
someone's salary,
right,
given the average salary in the United States. So it's
right.
really mind-blowing. And sometimes you would want to also ask, why are corporations interested in this, right? What is the
Mm,
corporate incentive in the birth rate? Well, one, the labor force for sure.
mhm,
Decreased birth rate, which is to your point, which is now in the US, I think 1.66
mm.
births per female, whereas it used to be two um not
Oh,
that long ago. And so it's the birth rate does impact the labor force.
mhm,
But then also, it, to your point, I want to touch on something you mentioned earlier. It affects retirement funds, right? And retirement funds are filled with stocks, right? And so if you have people who are not investing as much in retirement, it directly affects the stock market because there's just not as many people.
mm,
And then also, we should consider the fact that, can we sustain a healthier older population? Because the stats have shown that the youngest generation, sadly, is likely to be outlived by their parents, which
mhm,
tells us that the older generations are healthy.
mhm,
And because they're healthy, they're living much longer. And
mhm,
part of the ability to support a retired population is that you have a sustainable younger population that is
mhm.
then able to pay into Social Security funds. And
Right,
so when you have a decreased birth rate, then you
right,
don't have the Social Security funds that people have already paid into, that you've already used in the government. And now they want their money because they are
right,
trying to be able to live a decent retirement life. But if you
right,
don't have the workforce to continue that fund, then you have a discrepancy. And now you
right.
have already, even with some of the economic changes that we've had in the past few years, you have older retirees who have returned to the working force
Yes,
because they just can't simply afford to remain retired. And that is
yes.
becoming a trend. And at some point, there was an effort to increase the retirement age to possibly 70, which I say, bite your tongue. No, you not. But we do have to come up with an alternative, right? Because these are practical reasons
Right.
why we do need a reliable workforce. And you may wonder, is this why there is such a momentum towards the development and the expansion of the use of AI? Because on the other hand, you have people who are concerned about their job security with
because of
the
AI.
implementation of AI in their
Hmm.
jobs, and there's list of jobs that are more likely to be impacted by that. But
Hmm.
now, as we look at a depleted labor force, and I will say in my own profession, we have a shortage of OBGYNs, whether or not the utilization of AI would allow an individual clinician to then be able to see more patients. I'm not trying to give you all any ideas. I'm just saying in theory, right? In theory, because there is such a decreased labor force. Is AI the solution to this decreased birth rate? Will it resolve some of the concerns regarding the decreased birth rate? Will we no longer need as many humans in the population around the world? Like you said, Germany is being affected by this, Italy is being affected by this, Spain is being
Hmm.
affected by this, Japan's being
Hmm.
affected by this. So this
Hmm.
is a global issue. And what is the global answer to this problem that will eventually impact our pockets and our ability to retire?
One of the things that I was noting in with some of the other countries is you had, so at least one of the articles was talking about because there's more, like there used to be an inverse relationship, right? So the more
Hmm.
the mom was in the labor force, the less likely you were to have more children, right?
Right.
That
Which
was
makes
what it
sense.
was.
Hmm.
But that has changed to being more, the more engaged the father is in
Hmm.
child rearing, increases the chance of there being more children.
Which makes sense.
Right. Because
Hmm.
now it's not just on this woman to do all the stuff for the kid and to still work, because these are still women that are working. And
Hmm.
the other part that was also interesting to see is that with many of these other countries, they are, um, if they're having more sustainable type of growth, it's because they also have more support, whether it's universal free childcare up to a
Hmm.
certain age, and more like maternal health programs, or like maternity leave and things like that. So
Hmm.
you have some of these type of programs that are in place that are more geared to encourage, because that's what I think it is, right? They're looking to encourage people to keep having children, to
Hmm.
keep building up the economy, to keep building up the nations. But
Hmm.
they're encouraging you by providing support,
Hmm.
unlike some folk on this side of
Right.
the soil that want to be like,
I
have
just
them,
think,
just
force
have
you
them,
just because I said so.
because I said so. I man, you do.
Right.
We've gone back to caveman times, and
Right.
it's really just ridiculous when you think about it. And the statistics were just so fascinating, the way things have changed. So I
Hmm.
remember, even as little as maybe 5 years ago, there was always this talk about, oh, before, by 2050, we would have so many more Hispanics because the birth rate in that community is so high. But the evidence is showing that that is falling.
Hmm.
They're not having children as often as much.
Hmm.
The teenage birth rate has decreased.
Has decreased by
And so
3%.
that's
Hmm.
not happening as much. So we have
Yeah.
all these avenues that we have been supporting and wanting, the teenage birth rate specifically, but there are
Right.
all these
Right.
avenues that we would have wanted, and we're supporting, and we're thinking it's a good thing, and we're looking forward to it.
Hmm.
But the biggest thing is we still need to give people choice and give
Yes.
people support.
Yes. Yes. Do
Give
individuals want
people.
to have
Hmm.
children? That's the
Hmm.
ultimate question.
Hmm.
And the answer is probably more than what the birth rate reflects. And the
Right,
problem is because there are all these factors that put
right,
pressure on women. And there is a revolution, need I say, of women now saying, I don't want to because you have not made it healthy and safe for me to do so. You have
right,
not made it feasible for me to do so.
right,
Perhaps if I had equitable pay, perhaps if I had guaranteed maternity leave, perhaps if I didn't have to compete in my career as much, work twice as
right,
hard for half the paycheck, then
right.
perhaps I would make different choices. So the approach of making things more feasible and looking at some of the barriers to the birth rate is a much more equitable and much more feasible and, need I say, effective method than just
Hmm.
simply creating policies that require women to have children, that
Hmm.
place their actual health at risk
Right.
just to be able to increase the birth rate, which we may actually be on the same side. We may both want more children, but
Right.
we haven't created an economy nor a social
Construct.
structure
Hmm.
that makes that feasible for women to do.
Right.
So now what do? You create policies that increase the potential death rate, that increase,
Right.
if nothing else, the morbidity rate, where you now have permanently impacted a woman's fertility because she had to endure perhaps a miscarriage that was not appropriately treated because of laws and policies. And so now you have this subpopulation that also not only isn't giving birth or having additional children, but just simply can't.
What we didn't talk about is the fact that for a lot of these countries with lower birth rates, what they're looking at is migration and immigration to help make up some of that.
Oh, that part. Oh, listen, we been listen. Okay. We out here trying to block migrants, and they may actually be the solution to the problem. What do you know? What do you know? Dr. Trisa, I have to go before, we just be here. Just listen. That was a bomb drop. Okay, did y'all catch that? That was a bomb job.
Mhm.
So it's I think part of it is just that once again we're in this position where people don't really understand how women's
Mhm.
bodies work and how the birth rate work and how we process and how we choose and make decisions for ourselves. And somehow feel that demanding and and making policies that are restrictive is somehow the solution. And that's never been proven. That's why states that have the highest teenage birth rate are states with the highest restrictions.
Coming back to that point, but one of the other things that you said, it resonated, they're not making policies that are beneficial to women, but I'm wondering what kind of medical advice they're being given as well.
Mm-hmm.
Are we getting the doctors from the 1930s who have not done any kind of research and is working based on his knowledge of when he went to school then and not anything more recent? Or are we having people who are giving that medical advice based on current research and structure?
Yeah.
um, because an old school way of doing things, and not that there aren't beneficial things in there, but we do know that medicine can change. There's the art and practice, and there are things that have changed. There are things that have become better. There are things that we would like to be better, yes, but there are things that have become better. And are we using actual research and up-to-date research to make the decisions, to make medical decisions on? I'm going to assume that there's going to be medical advisors in the place, but like, who are these medical advisors and what
Right.
exactly are they saying?
And are they clinicians? Number one, and if so, because um, I do think that one of the things that's really has impressed me with the public is the fact that the public is so much more resourceful, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is a rising group in the general public that is able to internet search
Mm-hmm.
basic topic and information. What's really amazing as to the era that we're living in now is that information is so readily available. Now,
Yes.
there's also lots of false information out there.
Right.
But once people are aware of the reliable resources and they consistently go to those reliable resources,
Right.
we have a very well-informed public.
Right.
And the information when it comes to maternal mortality related not just to birth, but any aspect or any time frame within the
Mm-hmm.
pregnancy has been pretty consistent for years,
Mm.
and for a very long time, we have known things like hemorrhage as being one of the top causes of maternal death. And so if you have someone who goes to a hospital who's in the midst of miscarrying and she can't receive the care that she is in need of,
Mm-hmm.
then yeah, she can actually potentially hemorrhage. And you hear these stories of women who end up bleeding out half of their blood volume or requiring blood transfusion or come close to death just
Yeah.
simply because of the excessive bleeding, even in institutions and structures that are not restrictive. So this
Right.
is a very much reality of women
Right.
that has existed for decades.
Mhm.
So it's do they want the information? Do they want the valid information that is readily available?
Mhm.
And you would question really the sincerity of the
Mhm.
investigation and the
Mhm.
sincerity of those quests, which has led us to where we are now. Yeah,
Agree. Very much
yeah.
agree.
I would say that it sounds like with what we are both aware of and have read and have researched is that fix the barriers to birth,
True.
right? Improve our health. And I don't want to make this a maternal issue when it comes to fertility because it's also a paternal factor. We're seeing
Right.
a decrease in the fertility rate of men as well. So help us to fight obesity, but don't just give us a shot, right? Give us
Right.
a multitude of support, give us wellness programs so that we now can, for a lifetime, figure out a lifestyle that works for us over over decades and
Right.
not just something that can help the a certain corporation. I'm just gonna leave it right there. But also help us to make sure that there's equity and equal opportunity in education and employment so that women don't have to sacrifice their years. Make sure that
Right.
there's supportive systems so when women do give birth, that there is a village, an actual, not just an informal village, but a structural village that
Right.
helps women through their postpartum and the pregnancy experience. So they're more likely to either even continue working and being part of the workforce,
Right.
or just be able to feel that, wow, childbirth is feasible for me financially, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Help us to get rid of child poverty so that we're able to feed hungry kids. So women who are in the lower income bracket can actually feel like if I have a child, I don't have to look at my child who is starving. I have
Right.
options and resources to feed my kids.
Right.
Look at the top causes of maternal mortality, which now includes mental health as being the number one.
Right.
Providing mental health services to support
Right.
women in this new era where we have a growing number of mood disorders and
Right.
psychiatric illnesses. So it's looking at all of these factors that feed into that birth rate and not just looking at the birth rate and looking for some single solution. That's the lazy man's way of trying to
Mhm.
address the issue.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that
Agreed.
being said, Dr. T, once again, of course, she just helps me to go like we just go deep. We just dive off the plank like an Olympic star, gold medal only, and we go deep into the topic. Oh my gosh, that fed my soul. That whole discussion fed my soul. Dr. Trisa, I'm gonna give her a minute because she knows what I'm about to ask her. If they wanted to find out more about your journey and what your thoughts are on all of these topics, where can they find you?
On Instagram at tristajob.dpt.
Awesome, awesome. Listen, you can't trip her up at all. And I am Dr. T, the hand behind the handle of Healthy Bump Club right here on YouTube. And also the hand behind the handle of Healthy Bump Club on Instagram. And now you can find us on fan base as well as we grow that community as well and expand our reach. We thank you guys for supporting us. Let us know what are your thoughts about this topic because it's one of those topics that really is a legit topic we all need to be
Mhm.
talking about. This is
Mhm.
not a topic that only affects one aspect of the population. This is an
Yeah.
everybody concern. This is an everybody's
International.
pocketbook. This is what?
Mhm. Mhm. International.
This is international. Right?
Mhm.
All right, Dr. Trista, we can't wait to have you back on our next topic because you be coming with the facts. We see you guys with the next episode. And
Bye.